Oh, yes. Yes, yes. Welcome, everybody. A hearty and very, very, very big welcome. It is a Sunday night, and to all those joining us, we're beaming to you live from South Africa, Johannesburg. We're graced with a bit of electricity, so we're going to make the most of it and bring you StoryTime 11. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to host you. What a prime number 11 is. So we're going to make it special. Tonight we're going to go on for about, it's going to be a long one. We've got quite a lot of information to bring across to you guys. So stick around if you can. It's going to be about 2.5 hours, I would imagine, give or take. Yeah, sounds good. So 2.5 hours, and tonight what we're going to do is talk about Bilderburg and what is loosely known as the Round Table, which is basically a conglomeration of things like the Club of Rome, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, and Atlantic Council, if I didn't already say that one. We'll look at them all in depth in just a bit. And really, this is a follow-up from Storytime 10. So for those of you that are joining us for the first time, or those that just want a little bit of a recap, blending us into Storytime 11, basically what we do here at Storytime is, in a short word, we kind of take the mystery of what is the forces that kind of pull and push on us. When we look at our history and when we look at present day, we find that there's often very interesting links between them, and exploring these is really what kind of gets me going sometimes. Not only because it's important to what we find in terms of the chaos that's going on in the world today, but also it gives us ideas of solutions, because if you're not well informed and you can't formulate the problem correctly, then you're not able to apply the solutions effectively. So that's the that's the aim of Storytime. But of course, it's Storytime. It's just a story. I'm just some dude on the internet giving you some little tidbits of things that have come my way as just an explorer, a human, and a person with a little bit of a touch of philosophy and international relations as I wouldn't say an expertise, but a background, let's say. So I always encourage you guys to do your own research, to do your own thinking, critically and otherwise, and just look into these subjects. They're very interesting, and they all kind of touch together. And in Storytime 10, we kind of finished up looking at the Durham report. Now, this was quite I don't want to say an in-depth thing. It's not like we went through it line by line, and I gave a very broad overview. But what I did was link it immediately to Watergate and the IranContra, and things like the Pentagon Papers, and just a lot of the scandals that we've come across as the public. Now, things like Watergate and the Durham report are examples of when these secret people, and I say secret not that they're invisible to our eyes, but secret in the way that they operate. And as we mentioned in Storytime 10, Peter Dale Scott talks about this concept of the deep political system as not so much a state, because it doesn't have an organization. It's a diffuse outline, barely an outline. It's like a gaseous blur of people and institutions and military and intelligence and, all these good things. And these people are often unelected, and they interfere with the way humanity wants to move forward often. So that's what we kind of looked at with Storytime 10, is some of the big scandals that have become available to the public, and we can study them very deeply, whether it's the White House burglars, the CIA operatives that tried to suppress, firstly they tried to bug the Oval Office, and at the same time try and suppress the leakers of this information in the Nixon administration. And we link that directly to like the Durham report, which is, again, the Obama, Clinton, FBI, CIA, whole mix of people basically conspiring against the election and presidential functioning of their opponent at the time, which was Donald J. Trump. So it's quite scandalous, and we see how these people operate in the shadows. But I want to say that that's a bit of a let's call it a zoomed in kind of view, because we don't want to get caught in the weeds. We don't want to get stuck only seeing wood and no forest. it's important to sometimes take a step back and really try to see what is the big picture here, what's really interfering with our basic functioning. And we'll look at a few examples. So, ladies and gents, as I said, welcome to Storytime 11. This is going to be a wild ride. I hope you're ready. I hope you got yourself a nice warm beverage. It's getting cold here, so it's nice to have something warm in the hands. And as always, this is a dialogue, so feel free to drop your comments, questions, email us if you might not be watching this live. We'll post it on YouTube, and our email address is theprimematterpodcast@gmail.com, and same with the YouTube. You can find it there, the Prime Matter Podcast. So that's where we post the video of the Storytime links if you're not catching it live here on Twitch. So, just a few things going forward. What I really want to try and point out, specifically with this, what we're going to call the round table, I'm going to look at 5 specific groups of international elites and their involvement in every part of world affairs at the highest levels. Because, I mean, why not? Why not start right at the apex, right? You got to get right in the meat of things, so to speak. So, without further ado, let's catch up a little bit with the news, shall we? So, ladies and gents, recently, about a few weeks ago, there was the finishing up of a meeting called Bilderburg. Now, this is a group of people that meet every year. The only times I think they didn't meet was basically during Corona, and I assume they basically met telematically through some Zoom, or which I suppose is even better, because then they don't have to like have all the security and fly, and because it's always in a different venue. This year, Bilderberg was in Portugal. And it was in a very prestigious hotel called the Pistana Palace in Lisbon. So, you know, these places that they meet at get leaked at the last moment, and there's lots of subterfuge as to whether they happen here or there. But once they start to kick off, it becomes rather obvious. You see the big limousines and the fancy cars and the security details, of course. Lots more security than delegates, let's just say. And by orders of magnitude is the interesting thing. So this group of people, as I say, meet at this thing called Bilderberg, and it just happened recently. In fact, let's put it up on screen while we're sort of just chatting about it, shall we? So I'm just going to put it straight off like wiki, you know, Google search. It's not my favorite. It's not what I'd like to kind of put forward, but you know, it's what is like a common search engine, and sometimes the censorship or the misdirection of information is information in and of itself. That's why I like to use these very publicly available search things, you know. So, first things first, let's call it up here. And Bilderberg. Now, you know, it's not actually correct to call it Bilderberg. Technically, it's Der Bilderberg. The DE Bilderberg, again, refers to like nobility and things like that, but it doesn't go back that far. Although the people involved and the way they meet and these kind of clubs that they create, that does go back further back, much further back. So there you go. The Bilderberg group basically met on the 18th of May to the Sunday, May 21st. Okay. So that was about a week ago, exactly to this day. Now, oh look, there's already a Wikipedia section for it. So let's read it together, shall we? Bilderberg meeting is also known as the Bilderberg Group. Okay. Is an annual off-the-record conference established in 1954 to foster dialogue between Europe and North America. Now, when they say Europe and North America, what they basically mean is the Pax Europa, which is basically France and, well, it's Britain first and foremost, and then a little bit France representing the mainland continent. Now it's Germany. It's a bit of a tussle between that and the central powers in Italy as well, because some of the banks are there as well. But it's basically Europe and America trying to form a very strong, let's call it institutional web. And I say it's a web because the Bilderburg meeting encompasses many people across many different subjects of intrigue, so economics, politics, military affairs, medical matters, but also of incredible caliber. So these are, defense secretaries representing militaries. This is media Mongols, moguls, I meant. They are Mongols in a weird way, spreading disinformation as they do. The media moguls, they control a lot of what we see and what we experience as information on every platform. And then, of course, there's politicians. This is secretaries of state, prime ministers, all and of the above, So everyone, and it says here, political leaders, experts, captains of industry, finance, academia. I left that one out. Now, all of these are meeting rather secretly, and they have this thing called the Chatham House Rules. I believe it's pronounced Chatham House Rules, where anyone who comes to a meeting is free to use information from the discussion, but is not allowed to reveal who made any particular comment. It is designed to increase openness of discussion. So it also creates a layer of liability. Not layer of liability, sorry, of quite the opposite, plausible deniability is what I meant to say. And now that basically means that these folk can they meet in secret, all together to discuss world affairs. Now, these world affairs are, as I said, based on these Chatham House rules. Some pronounce it Chatham House, but I believe it's Chatham, the silent H. Now, these rules mean that they are not allowed to disclose who said what. They're not allowed to write anything down. Nothing's allowed to come out of that meeting other than what was discussed. Now, although some may say, well, what's the problem? You want to give them the space to kind of meet and make plans and speak their minds openly. But what are they afraid of that they can't speak openly with a public listening? Maybe delay the audio or something, but involve us in some kind of way. And I say that this is important because what's being formed here is something called policy. Now, in the world of politics, policy is literally the word that we use for the plan that government officially follows. When you say policy, you can back that by law, you can back that by funding, you can back that by legislature and all kinds of political powers. So when the Bilderburg group comes together and they start making plans, and we're not invited, those plans become policy, and then we have to, as civilians, we have to follow these decisions that our elite leaders make. And it gets more complicated. Because you'll see one of the big themes here is globalism. Now, it's not that I'm against nations having relationships on mutual footing, even in terms of trade, But at the same time, the planning behind the curtains of how this industry will work and how the society will form and how to control and direct that. Now, that is not cool if we are not invited to that conversation. And we see strange things happening with our politics. You see people want to push in one direction, and instead what they get is something a bit, I'm going to call it insane. I'm just going to use those words. A little bit insane because they make no real sense. If the aim of the government is to inform and protect the people's rights, it's a machine that we created to protect us, then why is it running away with its own laws, with its own interests, making money that never trickles to the people that need it, into, medicine and schools, jobs. If you want a healthy nation, this is what you start to look at. You start to help people live good lives. Instead, what they pump into is pharmaceutical companies and Wall Street and, biomedical, aerospace, all the shady big business things that go on and kind of take us all for a bit of a ride. So this is why it's important to frame things like the Bilderburg group and talk about the round table. So this is the 5 groups of globalists. And again, we're going to come back to the themes about the Bilderberg and people like the Council of Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute of International Affairs. All of these institutions come with incredibly powerful people, and very few of them are elected because they have come from companies and they come from the military and they come from media and academia and all these things. So it's not just a president, it's not just a parliament. There's a big mix of things going on there. And these people, as I said, are creating policy behind our back. And I want to look at the round table group because there's quite a lot of shady groups of powerful people that meet. Just ask Alex Jones and the Bohemian Grove. For funny games, let's pull that up. But I'm not going to spend too much time on it because really I want to point out the round table group because these are the ones that form official policy. So let's see here what happens if I put Alex Jones and Bohemian Grove. So what I just wanted to say here is I want to look at the round table group because these are real institutions with real political people of very extreme wealth, and it's still kind of locked in institutions like the United Nations, like the International Monetary Fund, the World Economic Forum, the State Department of the United States. It's still locked into the political mechanism. In fact, it's what the elite use to kind of hold onto and channel the political systems into their shape and form. And we'll look at why that happens, or why that happened, so to speak. But just to have a quick peek at this, as I said, the round table group are the more official and large-scale apexes of power concentration. But the Bohemian Grove is like this really wild, droidic space in the redwoods of California, where the rich and famous have met for all kinds of debauchery, heterosexual and homosexual otherwise. Forgive the terminology. I really hope you forgive the terminology. I'm quoting Nixon here. He called it, I believe this was from the Oval Tapes. I should have played that in the White House edition we had last month, but he called it the goddamn faggiest thing I've ever seen. And that was a terrible American accent, so you'll have to forgive me. But basically, they were calling in male prostitutes. They were calling in all kinds of rich and famous to discuss. And remember, Bohemian Grove had members that discussed the Manhattan Project. The first atomic bomb, if you weren't aware. So when presidents and leaders from all over the world, Jacques Chirac and all these folk come to have a little romp around in the redwoods and have these great big pagan rituals to giant owls where this is so off the cuff. I'm just going to go through this very quickly. But the Bohemian Grove, and I mentioned Alex Jones because he was the first to kind of get this on video. He snuck in and he took video of what they call the cremation of care, which is this Judaic pagan. I'm not too versed in it, but basically they take an effigy of what is once a lamb, and then they've now made an effigy of a small person, possibly a child, and then they cast their sins into it, all the sins that they've had to commit to, bring forward progress in their societies, whatever it is, and then they set it on fire and give it up to the effigy of Moloch, which, if you don't know, is a paganite god, Canaanite god. That had its halting and child sacrifice. Moving forward, I'm sorry, the big thing, but let's see if there's any video. Goodness gracious, that was. This is Joe Rogan talking about it. I wonder if. How long is this clip? 14 minutes now. It's a sight to behold. I really recommend if you take a look. I see even the History Channel has covered it, and you can see the giant owl there. Let me see if I can just pull up a good image of it. Oh, there it is. Good. First time. There we go. So this is the giant owl. Yeah. And as I say, this place has been visited by I'm getting completely off the mark here, but this is Moloch, more or less. And this is the giant redwood place that they meet. And as I said, good old Alex Jones, through some contacts, snuck in there and showed us these elites just having this weird ritual involving putting their sins into something innocent and then sacrificing that innocent thing on behalf of the group so that they may be purified to continue doing whatever it is that they think is right and just as leaders. I mean, this is like not very good reasoning, if I could just say that. So that's the Bohemian Grove. We're not going to get into that. That's a whole story time into and of itself. I want to jump back to the Round Table. In fact, the Round Table was mentioned in a really good article that I think, not article, it's a book, my goodness. And it's a really good book called Mastermind, the truth of the British deep state revealed. And let's see if I can pull this up here quick. Okay, there it is. It's a little bit graphic, so I hope you don't mind. This is by Adna Huriun Haya, and it's a great book. It's really just goes, forgive the term, balls deep, just straight into. She adds a few more components to the Round Table. As you can see, the United Nations is up in there, which kind of makes sense. But I stick to those 5 groups, and you'll see that inadvertently things like the United Nations, World Economic Forum, International Bank of Settlements, all these major institutions circle around them anyway. So we're not going to miss anything out. But there you can see basically the Council of Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, Royal Institute of International Affairs, Club of Rome, Bilderburg Group. So, and really what you're looking at here, she's talking about in this chapter, eugenics. The people that run this are not like, because, the term eugenics is a scientific term about just using your knowledge of genetics to guide your genes the way you'd like. So, in other words, the animal kingdom does this. They select for the strongest or the fastest or the one that can breed the most offspring, or whatever the natural hurdle they have to overcome is. Nature selects for that. But there is a kind of eugenics that is a twisted human concept of trying to make my genes or this type or lineage of family genes better than everyone else. There's that Hitlerian concept of the Aryan blah blah blah. But this is the kind of people that you're bumping into here, so well done to Adnahudan Haya pointing this out here. And you can see this is just like a really, really great book. And you can actually catch this online as well, so I do recommend it, and they go straight into the Eugenics Society and everything. But I digress. We're going a little bit back to the Bilderburg group. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you've just joined us, welcome to StoryTime 11. We're in for a ride. Oh yes, you can be sure. We're talking about the Round Table group. I've picked out 5 groups. The first one we're looking at is the Bilderberg. The reason we're looking at them is a follow-through from StoryTime 10. The Durham report was a nitty-gritty look at like this campaign and this CIA director and this political opposition person, but now we're going to zoom out. We're really going to take the internationalist view, the globalist view, as Alex Jones calls it. I mean, many have called it globalist before. It gets a bit of a bad tinge, but this is what these groups represent. The Round Table, Bilderberg being one of them. And as I say, it just happened last week to this day. That's why we started with Bilderberg first. Now, just something I want to mention here about Bilderberg. And I'm going to blast through this because it's a deep well, and a one that you can find many books, many articles, many very vocal voices that speak about these topics. And some of my favorite are a shout out to Jason Burmis, a shout out to Luke Rukowski, and just many others. Josh Friedman, he's currently following the Bilderberg group. I mean, these are journalists that have actually gone to Bilderberg and stuck a mic in the face of these people and said, "We are the public. Give us some kind of comment about what you are doing here and why you want to keep this from us." And often they get interesting responses. Some of them actually stop and sweat bullets as they try and give a few responses. So shout out to the people that actually report on this, institutions, well, not institutions, but reporters like the Grey Zone and all of those. Really, they are the only ones that, in a sense, sort of show up. I mean, these are people that basically think of wars, think of emergencies. And remember, some of their last meetings were about pandemics and health, global health risks. Remember, Bill Gates was there. And, this year they're talking about AI. So, this year's meeting, not only did they talk about AI, because we should actually take a look. We should actually take a look at the list of the people that have basically been there, because there were 2 interesting AI components there. There was the head of DeepMind and the head of OpenAI. So, you've got... these are the ones just off the top of my head. But so Stoltenberg was there. That's NATO. The defense minister of Ukraine was there, obviously asking for more weapons, money, funding. I suppose money and funding are the same thing, but they work a little bit differently. Peter Thiel was there along with the head of Palantir. Now remember, Peter Thiel is one of the founders of Palantir and one of the big finances of that. Obviously, Borlev was there, the Pfizer CEO. Sikorsky, the head of US-EU relations. If you don't know who Sikorsky is, he's the guy that when America, according to Seymour Hersh, in a very good article in the New York Post or Times, I'm not too sure, basically Seymour Hersh's article showed us how America basically bombed the Nord Stream 2 and the reasons for that. And Sikorsky was one of the first to thank America on Twitter for, putting a stop to that pesky pipeline. He deleted his tweet very shortly after, but, the internet doesn't forget. Internet does not forget. Good old. Good old Mr. Sikorsky. Anne Applebaum was there, also Nord Stream involvement there. Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, Prime Minister of Denmark, the Netherlands, Mark Rutte. You see what I mean? One of my favorite political figures, good old Sanna Marin, outbound as Prime Minister of Finland, but always welcome at the World Economic Forum and these other great big global international institutions that kind of do more than just your position can as the President of Finland would allow. So good old Sanna, she's stepping it up. And stepping it in the club too. She's got some moves. You must check those videos. And I say that not to... I mean, as a DJ myself, I approve. It keeps you young. Hopefully. We'll see. So, also dancing around this political table is, of course, Henry Kissinger. I mean, it's surprising that he's actually been invited to this because most of the people at this Bilderburg meeting are all anti-Ukraine. My apologies. They're all pro-Ukraine and anti-Russia. So their aim, obviously, is to protect what they call the liberal Western democratic system, the international order. They've got special jargon for this kind of thing. So it's basically the norms and values of the West. The liberal economic order, I think, is what they call it. So, in defense of Ukraine, they support with weapons and all these things to try and stave off Russia and China and all these other BRICS nations from their... What you would have these globalists believe is a challenge to their authority, and wrongfully so, you know, bad developing world for trying to, you know, form something like the BRICS and to try and break away from the petrodollar and try and have a bit more of an equal footing. And you can see that's why the BRICS is getting more and more interest and more countries are signing on, much to the chagrin of these elitists. And I think that that's where you start to see also a little bit of the international tension there. But let's call up the list. The Bilderberg, as I say, these are official things, websites and institutions, and so they have themselves quite a large footprint, and that's why I say you can study them quite effectively. They got a lot of media to go through and all these good things. So let's quickly then pull up the Bilderberg side of things. Okay. Now, here we go. As I said, we already went through the Wikipedia. Now you can see there it said that they didn't meet in 1976 when there was a scandal with Lockheed Martin, and in 2020 and 2021 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. You know... The Bilderberg group is interesting because, you know, people don't realize that the founding of this thing comes from people with very deep pockets and incredibly, even deeper still, flows of power, real power. Not only just financial power, but everything that comes with it, that eventually gives you money, and the money then flows back into the power that asserts itself and brings in more wealth and political clout, as it were. And you can see here on the Wikipedia some of the people that were at this meeting. And one thing I want to point out here, just to kind of get our minds around the depth and the control and the web of interlock between not only this institution and its people, because Bilderburg is quite big. I think it's got about 4,000 members, as it were, at the moment, past and present. I mean, the attendees are a small number. In fact, we can let's see. I'm sure they've got their here we go. Bilderburg meetings. This is its own official website. Very bland, very dry. Making sure you don't want to poke around too much. So it's a 3-day forum, informal discussions designed to foster dialogue between Europe and North America. This is exactly what Wikipedia said. First meeting took place at De Bilderburg, at Hotel De Bilderburg. So that's where Bilderburg comes from. It's actually De Bilderburg, from the founder of the Hotel De Bilderburg. And it was started in 1954. Now, what I want to point out here is the reason that Bilderburg began, and a lot of these other institutional equivalents, and some of them are much greater in their scope. But in my opinion, one of the reasons that these big international, supranational institutions begin to form is because, for example, during the Eisenhower administration, the think tanks at the time tried to put forward policy that had been blocked. And the moment it got vetoed by Congress, they were like, oh, well, screw you guys, we're just going to do whatever we want under the, not under the eyes of this legal political system that's so, it's like chains on our elitism. We want freedom. We want to hide behind shell corporations, and we want to hide behind non-profit organizations, non-governmental organizations, I should say, and supranational power centers like the United Nations. And we're going to hide behind these things, and we're going to push our liberal elitist views on people. And what's super interesting there is a lot of the people that have been involved in this Bilderberg group are people that have a very big it's called transatlanticism agenda, and I mean, they say it in their policy documents that they want Europe and North America to basically form a very strong alliance, and to basically command the social and political future of the world, be its leader, in other words. And so, people like Vladimir Putin are not invited, as they weren't to the G7. So, anyways, moving forward. These people here have their own agenda, and I found something really interesting while looking for all of this, and what came across my purview is in the Wiki Commons. If you look at this here, the Eye of Evil.jpg from the Wikimedia Commons, right? It's really great. It does. Let's actually, is this the big one? Yeah. So let's have a little look at all of this. This is to give you an idea of how deep this rabbit hole goes. This is why I say the well is almost infinitely deep. The rabbit hole is like a Mary Poppins bag. The more you pull out of it, the more keeps coming out. Now, what are we looking at here? Let's pull this up. So, yes. Oh my goodness. This is going to be interesting. Okay. So, what on all the good earth of this planet are we looking at here? Now, I'm surprised that it says at the top, we are trapped in a fictional reality, and at the bottom it says, time to free ourselves. I think that's a good message for our times. And what we are looking at here is the Eye of Evil, apparently. Now, in the center, this is what I want to show you. These are the people. Okay, we're just going to slowly pan around them. But these are people like your Rockefellers and your Kissingers and your the Rothschilds, and I mean just lots of people that are not elected officials often, who themselves have a lot of political power and control institutions and knowledge and the dissemination of information. And we often, I mean, I don't know half of these names. So I know George Soros, so I know that name. I know, Henry Kissinger. I know, Patterson and a couple of others. And you can see, we'll see eventually how they link to everything. We're not going to spend too much time on this, but I just want to make this kind of like an idea of when we say Bilderburg, when we say Council of Foreign Relations, when we say Trilateral Commission, we are talking about a group of people that control more power than people like you and I can even comprehend, because the web of things that they control interlock between themselves. When we say a shell company or a shell organization, really what we're talking about there is it's kind of like a system inside of a system inside of a system. It's a babushka doll. So it's like in QTEL in America, we know is a CIA front and always has been, or the Riley Coffee Company, how it had many people, including Oswald, work for them and say that they were going to then work for NASA or other aerospace companies. It's a front, it's a shell company, it's a fake company that runs itself. Maybe there's normal people that work there, but it's also a way for money and people to move around. And when we look at this big eye of evil, if none of these, when I've showed this to some people, the ones they'll point out will be like, oh, I know McDonald's. I see, there's Intel. I know Intel. Oh, there's Walmart. I know Gillette. I know the brands. I know the brands. And then they might know this corner here, down here. They might know, oh, yeah. I know the DNC. I know Mitt Romney. I know Hillary Clinton and the George W. Bush Foundation. And, these are very big political parties. So, of course, we know them, right? Biden for president and, John Kerry, McCain. And then you might know some of these people. These are also ministers, monarchs, and then this is where it starts to get a little bit blurry for most people. Unless you're politically minded, you're not going to know who the Secretary of Defense is, who the head of NORAD and NATO is, that a Bilderberg meeting is even happening. And that's fine. That's why you have story time, right? So this section here starts to get a bit more blurry. This is where we start to see the federally funded parts of American and other national parts of governments. And then it begins to flow into what these people call think tanks and study groups and other forms of institutions that do research and forms of what they call outsourcing, specifically of knowledge, of expertise, of resource, and so you get things like the Committee for Economic Development, the Institute for Advanced Study, Project for the New American Century, that's George Soros over there, and as you come around again, there's the Bretton Woods Committee. Now it starts to get into the really hectic think tanks. Council of American Ambassadors, the Cato Institute. These are all foreign affairs, nationalist, liberal think tanks. In other words, they think tanks that liberal's perhaps not the right word, because that definition has shifted over time. It's basically your neocon warhawks that push social agenda to try and make sure that the endless wars and enemies keep coming. And this is the part that a lot of people don't know. The Club of Rome, the Group of 30, the Economic Club of Washington, Center for American Progress, Brookings Institute, oh my goodness, Council on Foreign Relations, Hudson Institute, Atlantic Council, and you can see there the Trilateral Commission, World Economic Forum, Rand Corporation. I mean, how could we forget the good old Rand Corporation? Now over here, this part's pretty interesting. Now, this is what we've just gone through here is a lot of the legal policy making and political sections, and now it's doubling around back to the academic side. And on the academic side here, you'll see this here is the skull and bones, so that's Yale, Columbia University, Princeton, Rockefeller, Radcliffe, Harvard, and then of course all the fraternities and the world technology and national academics of engineering and science and technology flow back into these things. And again, when you swing back around, it starts to come to the investment side, the banking side, and then the big, the very big corporation side, the multinational corporation side. I can see that this is a little bit outdated because Bayer obviously was, there's now Bayer Monsanto. It bought out a huge chunk of that. Raytheon, Boeing, some of these we've definitely gone through, part of the advanced technology, advanced aerospace, and so on and so forth. Carlyle Group, and then we get back to the foreign intelligence. And of course, let's not forget this little section here. This is the media. This is the Washington Post and the New York Times and so on and so forth. So you can see then, when we zoom back out from this great eye of evil, we see that a handful of people, literally, what is that? Maybe, let's pick a big number, 500 people? Some say the number is 300. Some say the number is 300. A committee of 300. Some say it might be a council of just 13. We're going to look at some of these. Maybe not the Council of 13, I'm not too sure about that. But we're definitely going to look at these power structures, because as I said, the Durham report in Storytime 10 went really deep into the weeds, and now we want to zoom out. We want to see the forest for the trees. We want to understand what impacted Bilderburg and the Council of Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and all these good things. What effect do they have on us? It's a big one. It's a very important one. So stay tuned. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome and welcome thrice to Storytime 11. We are gonna have a good time. So, as I mentioned, Bilderberg is it's something that just recently happened, and it's a big deal, and it's a good foot into these globalist power centers. The next one we're going to look at is the Club of Rome. And really, actually, wait, let's do this a bit more logically. Let's look at the Council of Foreign Relations, because the Club of Rome is an extension. It's the foreign policy arm of the Council on Foreign Relations. And we're also then going to look at its twin, the RIIA, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIIA, RIA. So as I said, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Storytime 11. What we're doing here is looking at the really big powers that together form international institutions, that together make secret foreign policy, or they make policy ideas and papers that then they feed to their heads of state and their titans of industry and their academics, to then begin to mold society into the foreign policy outcomes that they're looking for. And we can see this in a number of different ways. And what I want to do now is jump into the Council of Foreign Relations. Oh, the good old Council of Foreign Relations. This, many people say, is the heart of the deep state. And as I said, when we say state in the word deep state, Peter Dale Scott says it's not a state. There's no order. it's just a mix, as you see in the Eye of Evil. It's just a mix, a big smudge of people just owning hundreds of things that in themselves own hundreds of things that in themselves just push around the money that controls us in the financial systems that we have absolutely no effect over. As one example. Obviously there's the political dimension as well. But the Council of Foreign Relations is super, super interesting. Now, the Council of Foreign Relations begins in 1921. So again, as I said, this is an example of where foreign policy made by these global elitists like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers gets a bit of pushback from the public and the politics and the law and the Constitution, for example, in America, because that's the one country they want to try and control because it is the most powerful military in a sense and has all this diplomatic clout, so it becomes the target of a lot of these forces. As George Washington would also attest, he also mentioned the Illuminati as a big threat. There's a great old letter where he recognizes the threat of the Bavarian Illuminati from Bohemia and the Habsburgs and all these other Weishaps, I think. Sorry, my apologies. But that's a whole other story time for another day. What I want to point out here with the Council of Foreign Relations is a few interesting things, because it's still going on. It's still a thing. It's still a very big thing. It gets massive attention. If you thought Bilderburg was big, Bilderberg's kind of like the testing ground where people like actually no, that wasn't Bilderberg, that was the World Economic Forum, but that's a good example as well. World Economic Forum is also like a good testing ground. They'll bring on people like Elon Musk and see if they stick around and if they play ball. So they don't always, as I say, they 4,000 members, that is Bilderberg, and yet the attendees are a few hundred at a time. So the same with the Council of Foreign Relations. Now, the Council of Foreign Relations, as I said, goes back 1921, and from its inception has just had, my God, masses of really powerful people, presidents. I mean, literally from 1928 to, I think, 1981, every American president has been a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. So think about the power that has channeled through those corridors. It's important to note that these people often attend all of these councils, the Atlantic Council, the Trilateral Commission, all of them. It's a bit of a rotating door. So you can begin to see and understand how the power structures really begin to show themselves. And so, the Roundtable Group, as I mentioned, has these two big components, because on the one side, and again, this is in the early turn of the 20th century, so we're talking like the early 19-somethings, the Royal Institute of International Affairs gets involved on the British side, on the UK side. And from that you get something like the Institute, the Tavistock Institute, which gets involved in that lovely word, what is it? Psychopolitical operations. Yeah, they basically inherit a hospital. Their foundations come from this big hospital that gets, big money and funding. And this is in the UK now, right? And they get all these academics and people with, government money and legal clout and political clout to sort of put forward these ideas and challenges to try and see if they can understand human well-being and, bringing the psychological aspect of politics to the fore. But what that often tends to link to is a lot of mind control and propaganda and the MI6 getting involved. And let's not get even into that at the moment. We'll touch that in just a moment. But that is the twin across the pond. the Royal Institute of International Affairs. But on the American side is the good old Council of Foreign Affairs. Now, it initiates in New York, but at some point it actually moves across to Washington, because I remember this interesting clip of Hillary Clinton basically saying, "Oh, it's a good thing you guys have moved closer." You know, she's saying to Washington D.C. She's like, "Now we don't have to go so far to get our marching orders." I mean, it doesn't get more blatant than that. Good old Hillary Clinton, bless her cotton socks. So let's call up some information, shall we? Let's have a look at the Council of Foreign Relations. Ladies and gentlemen, StoryTime 11 continues. So the Council of Foreign Relations, as I say, has this history that goes back all the way to 1921, and again a little bit before. So that's around the time of Herbert Hoover, Allen Dulles, Rockefeller has passed through there, or both of the Dulleses. So you can see heads of the CIA, presidents, generals, all of these people have been part of the Council of Foreign Relations. So let's do a thing, shall we? Let's call up their website, because as I said, they're all very official. They're a big deal, some would think. At least they will have you think. So this is the website of the Council of Foreign Relations, and as you can see, this is some of the things that they're talking about. The US debt ceiling coming up. There's good old Henry Kissinger, 100 years. This year, look at that, a centenary of good old Henry Kissinger, the butcher of Cambodia. That's a story for another time. Now, Kissinger is an interesting addition to the Bilderburg. Remember, we said that this is a bit of a rotating door. We said he was an interesting addition to the Bilderburg because he was the first big name that I can think of that basically said, look, the war in Ukraine is... it's going Russia's way. It's simple as that. It's like America trying to fight Mexico. Okay, I love Mexico to bits and pieces, but really what is Mexico going to do against the world's biggest military power? What is Ukraine going to do against the world's second biggest military power? Now I'm talking in general terms. So as the war has been going through and the threat of World War III and nuclear annihilation, let's not remember Biden. Let's get that video, shall we? I have to. Biden, that is World War III. Because before he sent those F-16s, this is the one here, he said to us, this is Bloomberg now, so we're just going to take a little clip of this. Ooh, that's super loud, thank goodness I had that. Hope I didn't blast your eardrums there, people. My apologies. Okay, let's try that again, shall we? Let's roll that back.
As we provide this support to Ukraine, we're going to continue to stand together with our allies in Europe and send an unmistakable message that we will defend every inch of NATO territory, every single inch.
Okay, every inch of NATO territory. So that's what they're doing. Because they want Ukraine to be a part of NATO. So, yeah, okay, moving forward. They're talking here, well, he's talking here, Biden, about his allies. So, this is at the start of the special military operation from Russia, the invasion, as it were. And Biden is now giving the first big statement that he has about this incursion by Russia on its border country, on its sister nation. And he says to his NATO partners, we are going to defend you, do not worry, you know, even though we're going to use Ukraine as a staging ground to try and, you know, stymie the Russian advance. But
with a united, galvanized NATO. One movement. That's why I moved over 12,000 American forces along the borders with Russia, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Romania, etc.
Yeah, Kaliningrad as well, a couple of other places. And you must remember, and I'm just going to say this outright, this has been an issue since 2008. When I was in university and we were doing mock UN It's like a game where you pretend to be the United Nations, so mock you in. Our big topic for 1 year was the missile defense system being set up by the NATO countries in Europe, which reduced the time that could be used to attack Moscow or other parts of Russia. And at the time, they were saying like, oh, Iran is testing ballistical missiles, so we have to have a good defense against Iranian ballistic missiles. Ballistical, my apologies. Ballistic missiles. So they wanted these air defense systems, and Russia said, we're supposed to have a policy of no one should have security at the expense of someone else's security, so let's talk about that. And that began a long, long downhill that eventually led to a coup and Russia just taking its own initiative and just, there's international law and whoosh, out the window. We're done with that. We tried that. The West didn't want to listen. We can't do anything. And that's kind of how I read it. Now, this is before all of this, or not before, but this is as this is happening. Biden's now trying to address his NATO partners.
Because they move once. Granted, if we respond, it is World War III, but we have a sacred obligation on NATO territory, a sacred obligation, Article 5.
NATO territory. Okay. Ukraine at this moment is not NATO.
And we will not, although we will not fight the Third World War in Ukraine. Putin's war against Ukraine was never be a victory. Democrats are rising to meet the moment, rallying the world on the side of peace and security. We're showing the strength and we'll never falter. But look, the idea.
Let me just pause it before he says it, because let me try and square this for all of you here. Internationalist globalist policy is followed by all countries of the world, because these global elites meet, these think tanks devise policy, and when they leave places like the Bilderburg and the Council of Foreign Relations and the Club of Rome and all these other places, they take this back to their leaders, their politicians and their lawmakers and industry people, and it begins to take hold in society, whether we want it or not. And we can look at, like, for example, the Dutch protests, the Canadian trucker protests, the Dutch farmer protests, the Canadian trucker protests, Occupy Wall Street back in the day. And what Biden is about to say, you can see, is policy that is international law. It's basically saying, we will hold NATO territory through Article 5, Chapter 5. We will defend NATO to the teeth. But
idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks and trains going in with American pilots and American crews. Just understand, and don't kid yourself, no matter what you all say. That's called World War III.
That's called World War III. Sending in tanks and planes and trains and all those other good things. But it happened anyway. This was then. We are here and now. So what happened? What happened to Biden's careful? That's World War III about to explode with Russia and NATO standing off. But now we're sending fourth generation fighters, and they're asking for nuclear capable missiles, and we've pushed beyond what Biden was warning us there of, and that is foreign policy, taking nations beyond the brink of what they would normally do. If you look at the polls, most people do not want war. They want to find some kind of peaceful resolution. Minsk 1, Minsk 2 tried. 2 peace plans during the offensive failed also because Boris Johnson came and through the Western partners and allies torpedoed that whole thing. Forgive me for saying, I can't imagine the amount of human suffering. This is why we're talking about this very sobering topic here on Storytime on a Sunday. It's important to keep in mind that things like this happen because leaders like Henry Kissinger and Soros and not just them, but politicians, the Bushes, the Clintons, the state departments, the military, the media, the academia, the industries of tech and, and factories and things like that, they all work together in lockstep to try and achieve a common goal. And often that goal is the elitist goal. It's not the goal that we want. We want peace. We want people to experience the wealth of their countries in the forms of education and healthcare and things that we know that strengthen a nation. But this is what pulls us back into the abyss the whole time. So there was Trump. My apologies. There was Trump obviously trying to stop these kinds of things happening, I think, during his presidency through the Abraham Accords and crossing the DMZ in North Korea. But you can see that the Biden administration earlier on was aware of the dangers of World War III and following through with this. That's the national idea that, if you're a member to NATO, that is your obligation. Now, that's all gone pear-shaped, and it's because things like the Council of Foreign Relations takes us in these really unwanted directions. And, as I said, their website's a bit dry, but you can see some of the topics that they're thinking about. The threat of school shootings, the cost of human life in Sudan, perspectives from the G7, so they've got topics that range from defense and security, diplomacy, international institutions, economics, energy, health, human rights, politics. The sprawl is everywhere. And as I said, these people eventually sometimes become presidents and heads of militaries and industry. So when they get together and they meet secretly and they make plans that we are not aware of, you best know that those plans are going to come to fruition one way or another. And another really good example of this is, for example, the United Nations UN Agenda 21. Okay, this is where the start of globalism kind of begins to take root. Now, obviously, Agenda 2021 has become Agenda 2030, if I remember. And transforming our world, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. So it sounds great. It's got all this wonderful flowery, all this flowery language about, eradicating poverty and dealing with global challenges in a collaborative partnership, implementing this plan worldwide to resolve things through bold transformative steps urgently needed, social, economic, and sustainable development. Those are the 3 dimensions. But what they're basically saying here is things that follow very closely to good old Klaus Schwab's Great Reset. You will eat the bugs. You will own nothing and be happy. This is all very, some people will term this Marxist in some way. I don't know, I come from a very strict political textbook kind of definition of Marxism, and it fits but not nicely. There's more precise definitions there to be unpacked, but it's an interesting way to think about it. This idea of circumventing national sovereignty for the greater good, for a centralized elite that know better than everybody else. And we're just the useless eaters. And we'll get to that maybe in the Council of 300 here. Because that is an interesting document that I would love to get into with you. But I was checking here Klaus Schwab, The Great Reset, because a lot of people say, oh, that's a conspiracy theory and all this stuff. No, it's a book that he wrote. It's actually called COVID-19, The Great Reset. So how do you like them apples? Essentially, this book discusses the outcome of the COVID-19 pandemic and how the world will form into a new world order, aka the 4th Industrial Revolution of the Great Reset. So, there's this is from the World Economic Forum And they've got this is their 8 predictions. Let's see which one is more recent. Okay, yeah. So 20 views on how to rebuild better after the pandemic. Let's have a look at this, shall we? This is promo video, so hopefully we don't get a strike on this. Here we go. Future of manufacturing. I don't think I'm going to watch that whole thing. I just want to see the... Is it this one? Nope. Oh, actually, yes. This might be it. Event 2021. They call it Event 201, but I want to just put forward a little bit of this. Now, I know we're talking about the World Economic Forum, and we're getting a little bit off the beaten path of the Council of Foreign Relations, but the Council of Foreign Relations is it's a very hard nut to crack. So the World Economic Forum and these groups of leaders getting together, making plans for emergencies that take away our rights and supersede our constitutions, and basically allow a bunch of chicanery and collusion to happen illegally, is a good way to kind of get into the picture. So in other words, looking at the World Economic Forum is a good way to kind of get our heads into what is the Council of Foreign Relations. So let's just take a small peek at a bunch of these. So I just want to point out that this here is from the World Economic Forum, and it's a promotional video that they're doing. So this is a staged event. In other words, what you're seeing here is a bunch of actors pretending that there was a massive simulation of a viral outbreak. Okay, so not a simulation in this fictional story that they've put forward to you. A big outbreak has happened. Oh, scary, scary, scary. Let's watch what happens. This is what we learned. This is what we learned. Experts have long warned about the threat of a global pandemic. Oh no. And governments and organizations have tried to plan for one. Okay, so this is their meeting and trying to plan for one. And in October 2019, we ran a simulation in New York. 2019, they ran a simulation in New York talking about epidemic events. I'm going to just jump a bit forward here. To remember, this is 2019. Check here. So they're talking about the big one.
To respond, and to respond to the big one, we do need to have all hands on deck.
All hands on deck. So, Bilderburg, Council of Foreign Relations, Atlantic Council, Trilateral Commission, World Economic Forum, the Davos Group.
Participants are confronted.
And all of this. So, this is the World Economic Forum. Not only are they saying that to spare us the problem of nitrogen, Dutch farmers, in fact, let's call it up, shall we? Because the European Union had a very strong, what would you call it? Let me just think about this. It was a decision that they took at the European Commission against a long battle that the Dutch farmers have had to try and protect their farms and their livestock and their livelihood. And they've tried to negotiate with government, the local government, the Dutch government, the government of the Netherlands, to try and balance because they are one of the most carbon neutral countries in the world. Let's just face it, the Dutch know what's up. But at the same time, they want the supranational powers, like the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, want them to cut more emissions. And this time it's not carbon, it's nitrogen. They must cut nitrogen. And they basically have tied their hands of the farmers to the point where they are now being forced to sell or some will be selected by the government and forced to sell their farms, and there's no guarantee of what will happen to their livestock. They can't even take it out of the country, apparently. So, hundreds of years of farming generations, some of the best farmers in the world, in Europe and the world, providing food at a time of incredible scarcity because the breadbasket of Ukraine is now, under siege. And people like the World Economic Forum and the EU group have decided that they know what's better for the citizens. And so I'm just going to show you some of the news articles. We're just going to sort of run through them. You can see Political, there's Associated Press. Let's actually have a look at the Associated Press, because again, they give give the best intake, but they've often got the first big official scoop on the matter. And you can see that by this article, the Dutch ruling coalition wants to cut emissions of pollutants, predominantly nitrogen oxide and ammonia, by 50% nationwide by 2030. So that's where the controversy comes in. It was not immediately clear how much of that target could be met using the EU-approved funds. Some 3,000 farmers are expected to be eligible. But let's see when this was posted. This was 2nd of May 2023, so not that long ago. But things have progressed. And as I said, the Dutch farmers have basically loaded up for war. This is a red line. Who's going to give up their livelihood and threaten food security for not only themselves, but the country and the rest of the EU? So there's this tension. There's this tension again between the people and the global elites that basically meet behind closed doors and make plans that we don't have any say in. So let's jump back to the Council of Foreign Relations. And I want to just show you a quick peek relating to their history, because their history is very interesting. When we look, as I said, of their founding, basically remember this, that World War I finishes, okay, that ends, it is the war to end all wars, and we see carnage like we've never experienced as a human race. Remember, this is why the mystery schools started to give out all this information, because they were just like, we failed. Humanity's gone nuts. They have no spiritual centering or grounding, and look what they're doing. They've fallen into this great trap. But, another story time for another day. But basically, the rebuilding of the global economic order sort of gets put forward by Woodrow Wilson's 14 points in 1917, if I remember. He creates this group called the Inquiry. And now remember, the 14 points, I just want to point out as another little hook. For those of you that know Edgar Cayce, Woodrow Wilson had a few readings with the psychic Edgar Cayce. And you can see and view those readings through the Cayce Institute. All of the readings have a number, and they're well documented. Not all, but most, 98% of them. And Woodrow Wilson has readings from Cayce, and it's apparent to us that the ideas for the 14 points in the League of Nations, through the group that he creates, the Inquiry group, excuse me, basically becomes the League of Nations, and basically becomes what is the future United Nations. Now, as I said, Wilson signs this at the Paris Peace Conference. So you can see that again, America and continental Europe and the UK and such are again molding together. And remember, their intelligence agencies at this time also begin to mix the OSS and all these other things. And they create this because basically Congress at the time pushed aside some of their policy recommendations. They decided to start this Institute of International Affairs, and that was in 1919. And this is where we start to get the idea of a one world government, a new world order, because basically they were like, well, America needs to be coordinated. If Britain and America work well, and Europe works well, and all the Western nations work together, and everyone jumps on board, it's a great hunky-dory, rainbows and unicorns and sunflowers everywhere, and it's a great big happy time for everyone. But it's not. That's not what we. That's what they sell us, but that's not what we're actually getting. In truth, instead, what we're getting is a bunch of people that, again, number 2 of their bylaws is that anyone that puts out any of the secrets of the Council of Foreign Relations is immediately expunged from the council. And who knows, what else they'll be blacklisted for, if anything else, So it seems open to the public. As I said, in the background here, you're looking at their official website, and you can read their articles, and you can see when they met, and who was there, and all these other things. And you can join them. It's but at the end of the day, they are like the Trilateral Commission, and like the Bilderburg Group, and like the Club of Rome. They are an insidious group of very powerful people that make decisions just at the whims of international bankers, of global institutions. And when I say international bankers and global institutions, I'm talking about like JP Morgan Chase, and the Rothschilds, and the Rockefellers, and it's got funding even up to this day through like the Mellon family, and it's crazy, So whilst this club has presidents and secretaries of defense, and really, as I say, the Council of Foreign Relations just takes it to a whole new level. They have with them intelligence from the Air Force, from Navy, from the Federal Bureau of Investigations, from the CIA, and then that's just the American side. And then, of course, they've got the MI6, which is the military... What is it? The Military Institute Directive Number 6. I believe that's what that stands for. And, when you look at people like Henry Kissinger, and the amount of involvement he's had in just every form. I mean, he's been around for 100 years. This year he turned 100. So when you look at his involvement, he's just one of many huge names that come up in the Council of Foreign Relations. I mean, like, they've got presidential candidates. I'm reading here, Bill Clinton. They've got George Bush, Jimmy Carter, Dwight Eisenhower, CIA directors, Department of States, Department of Treasury, presidents of various commissions and executive, functions and boards, union presidents, CIA directors. I think I said that already. So on and so forth. People from what we call military fellows. So people from the Allied Supreme Command, secretaries of defense. The media, and of course CBS, New York Times, all of them, ABC, they all form part of this really big group called the Council of Foreign Relations. And when we looked at the evil eye, we can really start to get a glimpse of just how far these tentacles spread. And as I say, the Council of Foreign Relations want to control politics by eroding national sovereignty and having control of the political and legal and economic arms of every country. And that's why we look at the Dutch EU farmers or the Canadian truckers. They are fighting for a national cause that is being put down by a higher international cause, as it were. So let's go a bit further, shall we? All right. So the main thing I want to mention here is that the Council of Foreign Relations, as I said, is the heart of darkness in a way. It's insidious, not because we've got all these powerful people meeting and making decisions, but the decisions that they're making are truly devastating. Devastating to mostly the third world, or the developing world as we call it. And people like the mayor of New York back in the day, Mayor Hayland, he stated that the Council of Foreign Relations is I'm paraphrasing, he calls it the real menace, and he calls it the international government with the slimy tentacles, and basically, you got people like Kissinger that are the ones that have opened up the dirty industry that accelerated China's growth, but really turned China into this technological gulag, in some kind of way. There's a dictatorship of great technocratic power there, and that was planned. That wasn't an accident, And one of the big things is that the Council of Foreign Relations also has, in my opinion, far too strong an interest in the health and the future of societies, and the way we think and the way we act and the way we are controlled. So they would like to have a lower population. They would like to have no country have a military force. In fact, if you look for the Department of State, it's a publication 7277 that basically talks about how they would love to get rid of the American military and just have a UN military force just take over. They want to take away the armaments of the populace so that it cannot defend itself, nor can it go against the power that kind of comes down on them as the future is shaped. But they also then have this, in some of their documentations, phase 2, which is to reduce militaries worldwide, make Russia and if I remember correctly, they wanted to make Russia, China, and America have equal numbers, 2 point something, a balance of 2 point something each, and then international councils, international government, military, industry, trade, and all of that sounds great, but at the same time, it just means that fewer and fewer people have more and more power in ways that we cannot control, nor can they be accountable for, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, this is the Council of Foreign Relations. As I said, it's not a good thing. Although you will always have political structures that will try and work together and form larger structures of coordination, that's fine. That's going to happen naturally. We want greater efficiency in a political system. But what we don't want is that apex running away with laws, technology, and money, and doing whatever the hell it wants illegally, in my opinion. So we're going to start to really look at this in its context. As I mentioned, the Club of Rome is the foreign relations arm or branch of the Council of Foreign Relations. So the Club of Rome basically is the section of the Council of Foreign Relations that really digs deep into the changing of countries. And so let's call that up, shall we? I mean, we might as well. Let's dive deep into here. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. A very big welcome to StoryTime 11. Oh my goodness, we're looking at the powers that be, the they that conspiracy theorists talk of. But more soberly, we're looking at the real big centers of political power that are supranational. That means they go above the laws of your country and my country and force us to take a direction that we don't really have control over nor accountability for. That's why they have these big institutions that you have to sort of play ball to be a part of. And here's the Club of Rome. You can see, very official. It's a non-profit, informal organization of intellectuals. What did Wikipedia say? Of intellectuals and business leaders whose goal is a critical discussion of pressing global issues. pressing global issues. That's why I say they're the foreign arm of the Club of Foreign Relations, Council of Foreign Relations. Now, they say here on their own website that their history basically goes back to 1965 through Aurelio Pecci, an Italian industrialist. And I want you to remember that name, because that name's going to come up, if not in this story time, definitely the next one. Oh, how it will come up, how it will come up. But basically, the again, the founding of the Club of Rome is famous because it involves a lot of people that have with them studies of human society and the future of human events, social and natural and all of that, biological and otherwise. And they employed a form of AI simulation. And there it is. Jay Foster, a systems professor at MIT, offered to use computer models he had developed to study complex problems which concern the group more rigorously. And in 1972, the club's first major report, Limits to Growth, was published. Limits to Growth. The world is suffering right now as we speak population collapse. If you take, for example, Elon Musk's opinion on that. If you look, our replacement rate for the next future generations is way below the necessary. This is why China's uncapped their growth rate. And this is why we're looking at nanotechnologies to try and figure out how to create the next generation of, how to create pregnancies, because our sperm rate, not our sperm rate, our, the parts per milliliter, the concentration and their ability to perform has reduced a huge amount in the last 50 or 60 years. Which means if you project that to another 50 or 60 years, we might all be sterile. This might be a case of some of these sci-fi movies where no children can be born anymore. And we have to develop them in labs with CRISPR technology and artificial wombs and things like that. And that's the direction that these people want to go. The limits to growth is, we've spoken, for example, about the Georgia Guidestones, which recently blew up this year. And the Georgia Guidestones were also a bunch of tenets put on a marble edifice that had, this building was kind of aligned and was meant to surpass all the generations into the future, to be a lesson to, future humans. And one of the tenets was to keep the population of the Earth under 500 million. And we're billions at the moment, so where do all these people go? And, so that's where conspiracy theorists, I say theorists in inverted, air quotes there, inverted commas, that, many of these theories are proving true. And when we look at some of these policy papers, that is what we're seeing. We're seeing ways to stop and slow the growth of humanity in many different ways. Bill Gates is a famous one. He was on a TED Talk, puts up a formula on the board, and one of the things in his equations is P, population. And he's like, well, if anything had to affect all these other variables, P, the population variable, like if that was 0, no problems. If that one variable was 0, all the other problems would disappear. So that's the one we have to focus on, population. Oh, good old Bill Gates. So, with upcoming nanotechnologies, with gene technologies, with biomedical breakthroughs that are coming through, have to be very wary of these big supranational institutions that work in lockstep. And often, as we saw through the last health crisis that we had through the COV 1.0 and 2.0, we see that basically they have great effects on us, and the response from the governments are often out of our control. And then only after the dust has settled, we see that our rights were really just thrown aside in many ways, and that we weren't treated with the kind of humanity that we expect our governments to, provide for us. So, this is basically the Council of Foreign Relations. I want you to keep these themes in your mind, because we're going to end off in a really interesting way here. Because, as I say, the Club of Rome also goes way back, and when we look at it, they got a button here called achievements. Let's see what their achievements are. Planetary Emergency Plan. September 2019, Club of Rome launched the Planetary Emergency Plan on the sidelines of the UN Climate Action Summit in New York. The plan, which was drafted in partnership with the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, provides a set of key policy levers addressing the cross-cutting challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and human health and well-being. Remember that famous word I was saying to you earlier, which is psychological social operations. That is the Royal Institute of International Affairs through the Tavistock Institute, which is linked to the Council of Foreign Relations. As I said, it's just the American counterpart. And again, same kind of themes, right? We are trying to deal with human well-being and human health and the mind and the body and the genes. Trust us. So it just says here, it outlines a vision of transformation and regeneration, a roadmap for governments to set in motion a decade in which the development path of our planet is steered into one which is inherently beneficial for all living species, leaving no one behind. All living species, right? Does that mean the aliens or the dolphins or the orangutans and the rainforest whose, territory we cut down for palm oil? I don't know. That's a good question. As I say, we can't really ask them these questions because they have these meetings behind closed doors in secret places that we only find out at the last moment. So let's just start to tie this up, right? Let's have a look here at the, as I said, the counterpart on the other side of the pond, as it were, from America, is the Royal Institute of International Affairs. And this is where the Chatham House Chatham House rule and Chatham House think tank kind of center themselves as. So see, it points first to the Chatham House Institute. But we would like to see here if we have rights and access to this book. Oh, we don't. Okay. So we'll have to take it from the Chatham House. In fact, let's see if we can get a wiki on this, just to get a bit of a rundown. Willy, let's try that again. Wiki. So the Chatham House, aka the Royal Institute, so I assume the history will all be here. The Royal Institute of International Affairs, also known as the Chatham House, is a policy institute headquartered in London. Its stated mission is to provide commentary on world events and offer solutions to global challenges. It is the originator of the Chatham House rule. So, again, it's got this history of philanthropists and people joining at these meeting places, attended by people like prime ministers and other very influential people. And they meet and they talk and they devise, as they say here, it's to provide commentary on world events and offer solutions. But now, we're wiser to this whole thing, right? We know that when they say we're offering solutions, really what they're doing is providing policy suggestions for countries to then begin to move and coordinate with. Often behind closed doors without any way of us having access to that. So the Royal Institute of International Affairs, I just want to point out, is the counterpart of the Council of Foreign Relations across the pond in the UK. And it starts out with this bizarre setting in the medical field, and then the medical field goes to the social field, and then the social field goes into the political world, and it gets funding and backing, and it becomes also involved with military and federal forces, so you can see here that it goes very far back. It goes through the post-war years, and in the recent history, let's see, the Institute celebrated its centenary in 2020. The series of special events and new initiatives. It has a panel of young advisors and all good things. Recent reports, we can look into that later. But basically what I want to mention here is that the Royal Institute of International Affairs is closely involved with the Tavistock Institute. And now, while this comes across as a medical and social rooted institution, as I said, it's got these deeper and more insidious ties into these psychological operations. And so this is the fourth member of our round table, so we looked at the Bilderbergs, we looked at the Council of Foreign Relations, the Club of Rome, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and now we're going to have to wrap it up with the Trilateral Commission. Because again, these five, if you had to start digging down the rabbit hole of who controls the deep political system, as Dr. Peter Dale Scott calls it, these are the kinds of institutions that you'd have to look at. When I say I love policy documents, they've got tons of them, whether it's the RAND Corporation, which is another think tank, or the Atlantic Council, another think tank, the Endowment for Democracy, another think tank, so on and so forth, Bellingcat, and all these other, they may sound like, oh, we're just making suggestions, and we're just observing global affairs, but their suggestions often become policy, and this is obvious to us, so that's why we have to keep an eye on these things. So the fifth and final instigator of this whole thing is good old Trilateral Commission. Now again, Kissinger, heads of state, Soros, CIA heads, all of them. All of these people have been at one stage or another involved with the Trilateral Commission. So let's call them up quick on our screen here. And again, I'm just going to quickly read the top of the Wikipedia here just to give you an idea of the public wording. And then we're going to dig a bit deeper into it. So it says there, the Trilateral Commission is a non-governmental international organization. Key underscore that word, international organization. It means that it is supranational at its scope, aimed at fostering closer cooperation between Japan, Western Europe, and North America. It was founded in July 1973, principally by American banker and philanthropist David Rockefeller, who is an internationalist. Now, internationalist may not sound so bad, but again, remember, these are the groups of people that were rejected by the legal and political systems that you and I run, and then they were just like, well, we're rich and powerful, we don't need your governments, we're just going to make something that's more powerful than your government and tell your government what to do. That's an internationalist, and a globalist, and a deep state Illuminatiist, as it were. There's many names for different cabals of people. They get blamed for these centers of power, but we must remember that it's a big smush of just really influential people. Not all of them are known to us in public. But the Trilateral Commission has a very big rotating door of them. And you can see here that it is headed by an executive committee and 3 regional chairs representing Europe, North America, and the Asia-Pacific region, headquartered in Paris, Washington, and Tokyo, respectively. Meetings are held annually. Locations rotate amongst the 3 regions. Most gatherings focusing on discussing reports and debating strategy to meet the Commission's aims. Membership in the Trilateral Commission is highly selective. And when I say highly selective, that means you only are involved if a member taps you on the shoulder, and then you go before a committee, and then if they're happy, then they put you up for approval. But basically, you have to have someone tap you. You have to be seconded. You have to go in front of a committee. You have to there's a process. Not just anyone can be part of the Trilateral Commission, like Brzezinski and Jimmy Carter and some of the other founders. And think of, when I say those names, how much political history goes into someone like Brzezinski or Jimmy Carter or David Rockefeller. I mean, there's the Manhattan Project in there, there's the CIA in there, there's military industrial complex and the space. That's not... Anyways, moving forward. As of 2021, there are roughly 400 members, including leading figures in politics, business, media, and academia. Each country within these three regions is assigned a quota of members, reflecting its relative political and economic strength. The organization represented influential commercial and political interests that share a commitment to private enterprise and trade, multilateralism, and global governance. This as a subject of criticism for elitism. Okay, so multilateralism is basically many countries working together, which is good. In politics, you have a country, I have a country, we talk, that's bilateralism. A third country talks in our group, and that's multilateralism. That's great. It's just not great when it's running unabated and creating infinite wars and emergencies and all these kinds of things that erode the sovereignty of nations. Remember the Phase 1 wanted to, have a United Nations military and all these kinds of things. Goodness gracious, the world we live in. So, the Trilateral Commission, as I said, founded in 1973. It is, important to kind of point out how important Brzezinski, who was a Rockefeller advisor, kind of ties into a lot of these things. Just through Brzezinski alone, I mean, you can see here there is SALT I negotiator, Council of Foreign Relations, United States ambassador to Japan, governors of Pennsylvania, European Policy Center, Harvard Center for International Affairs. So you can see the kind of influence that just someone like Brzezinski had. And then, of course, you got Alan Greenspan and Flocker from the Federal Reserve, and David Rockefeller himself. A lot of power, and they might say it's for philanthropic objectives. They want to try and understand the world and shape it in a different way that's positive. But their view of positive, 500 million people, kind of depopulation, eugenics, and all those good stuff, all those good things, it's maybe something I'll pass for, and maybe something that's not really to the aims and objectives of the human race as a whole. It's just a bunch of elites that want to do what they do. So let's wipe the board here. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the wrap-up of StoryTime 11. We've been going for about 2 hours. We're going to go for about another 45-ish minutes or so. But we've just wrapped up looking at the round table. Now, the round table in this context is 5 institutions that I've kind of picked up and wanted to present to you tonight. Why? Because the Bilderburg the Bilderburg group literally just met last week. And so I wanted to bring to your attention that whilst there is great political corruption in things like the Watergate scandal and the Durham report that we looked at in the last version of Storytime, I wanted to zoom out and show you some of the big political institutions and political power centers that go above the nations of the world and command them through everything: media, academia, institutions, politics, medicine, everything. And these power centers are people that meet through rotating doors of clubs and committees and the like. And again, they talk about all kinds of policy decisions and the direction of the world and what they think is best for all of us, often with disastrous effects. If you look at many countries, you will see that they have suffered from some of these policies. Many come to mind. Cambodia, Laos, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, lots of these global problems, even stuff like in the Ukraine. It's important to really get to grips of the forces that are pushing us to global conflict and global emergencies. We should be having pandemics maybe once every 100 years, and now it seems like they're happening once every few years. How does that work? Lots of things to uncover and unpack there. So as we come to the close of this round table of really powerful, super sketchy elites that look for a one world government and want to erode the sovereign laws and political machinery of the people of the world, what is their aim? What are they really trying to achieve here, other than just power for the sake of power itself? And why does this touch into mystery schools and continuation of government and secrecy, and how are they getting away with all of this in a certain sense? So how we're going to wrap this all up is I want to just talk to you guys about, many people call this the New World Order. We've heard this term mentioned a dozen times. What's up, Beanie? Nice to see you, my friend. Yes, I did have a little bit of a shave. But really, what we're going to wrap up on are two super, super interesting things, because to try and get our understanding as to why are there these, secret powerful people making secret powerful plans on behalf of all of us, and why do we have no access to it, and how does it all kind of connect? I think one way of doing this and trying to understand this idea of the New World Order and the elites is to look into the CIA vaults, or a very fantastic book. It's not very long, by Chan Thomas. And Chan Thomas has this book that was only released, declassified in 2013. I mean, this thing was written in the 60s or the 50s or 60s, somewhere around there. And it was only really recently declassified. There's still pages missing and all these things here. But what is this Adam and Eve story? What does it have to do with this deep state business, these global elites, this one world government, and all of that? So as I said, we're going to look at the Adam and Eve story by Chan Thomas, and then we're going to look at the Committee of 300, also in the FBI and CIA vaults. Now, that's by John Coleman, because that will really wrap this up. But first, we're going to take a little step into the deep waters. So, as I mentioned, the global elites have a plan for us. Their fascination is all about trying to figure out how humanity functions so that they can control it, because they want the future to be in their favor. Right? It makes sense in a way. But the problem is you're not invited to this party. Now, why was this book here censored and only declassified in 2013? I'll tell you why. Because this story, and again, it's a story, the author doesn't really claim, he claims some truth to some of these things, but he doesn't say that, it's gospel, so to speak. But the story basically talks about cataclysm. It says that the world, this is a very general breakdown, the Adam and Eve story basically talks about what ancient texts have always warned us about, that in the earth itself there are natural phases that the earth goes through, and we thought they were we thought they were like mass coronal ejections and radiation from the sun and pollution and jet streams and things like that. But Chan Thomas basically says no, the earth itself has its natural cycles where we have cataclysm. there's an energy system within the Earth itself. And like a coronal mass ejection, the Earth from the inside has this mass belch of energy, which completely changes our weather, completely changes our physical geography, and obviously causes cataclysm that many times humanity has suffered. In fact, let's just start at the bottom here, because a lot of these topics go a long way in helping us understand, as I said, our history and our current place in time. And when you smush the two together, you get mystery just pouring out of it. And this kind of a topic is followed by someone like Graham Hancock and many others. This idea that we came from many previous civilizations that themselves were destroyed. And what I want to read to you here is a little section. This is from the Timaeus, written by Plato. Now, people like Hancock and others point out that Plato had an ancient uncle called Solon. Solon went to Egypt to get knowledge from the ancient temples and the priests of the time there. And this is a section where the priest of Egypt says to Solon, and this is Plato's account of what was said to his uncle, he says, "Oh, Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are but children. There is no old doctrine handed down among you by your ancient tradition, nor any sciences which is horary with age. And I will tell you the reason behind this. There have been and will be again many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes, the greatest having been brought forward about by earth fire and inundation." So earth fire, that's volcanoes, earthquakes, things like that, and inundation is water, mudslides, things like that. And he goes further and says, whatever happened either in your country or ours, or in any country of which we are informed, any action which is noble and great, or in any other way remarkable which has taken place, all that has been inscribed long ago in our temple records, whereas you and other nations did not keep imperishable records. So he says there that we've inscribed this long ago in our temple records, but you haven't kept this in an imperishable form, and so your race, the Greeks, the Hellenes, the Hellenics, have forgotten their ancient past. And he says further, after a period of time, the usual inundation visits like pestilence and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education. And thus you have to begin over again as children, and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, either among us or among yourselves. As for genealogies of which you have related to us, they are no better than tales of children. For in the first place you remember only one deluge, whereas there were a number of them, and in the next place there dwelt in your land, which you do not know, the fairest and noblest race of men that ever lived, which you are but a seed or remnant, and these were not known to you, because for many generations survivors of the destruction made no records. So these are the Olympians. These are the great Prometheans. These are the great antediluvians. These are the great Anunnaki, if you look at the Sumerian cultures. These are the great gods. Plural gods. Demigods in a way, because I reserve the term God for a really all-encompassing creator of a universe. And so plurality of them is difficult to imagine. One in the form of many, like Shiva or Krishna or whatever. That makes a bit more sense to me, but here in this case he says the gods were ancient and we come from them, and they too, through these deluges and inundations and great earth fires, left just survivors who couldn't keep records for thousands, or maybe not thousands, but for a great amount of time. because they were just barely surviving, as the Earth completely went on its head. Now, what does this have to do with things like the Council of Foreign Relations and the Round Table and stuff? And I tell you that, as I say, when these great, powerful institutions make plans for the future, we looked at how they often center around these doomsday ideas. We looked at continuation of government and how they look at just the end times and the doomsday devices that, with just the sniff of war and emergency, they're willing to let all the weapons of the world go off and destroy everything. A real nihilistic view of the end of the world, of Armageddon, as an almost inevitable as almost an inevitable outcome that they have to prepare and plan for. And that's why we spoke about deep military bunkers and conflagrators and underground cities and breakaway societies, because if this was censored by the CIA for many years, it means that something in here has a grain of truth, possibly. It could be a psyop. But it's an interesting thing that when we start to tackle the concept of climate change, maybe this is what they're sort of talking about. Maybe that's why there's so much controversy around it and obfuscation. Maybe there's a natural process of the Earth that awaits us. And as the governments and militaries begin to plan for this, we're, in their opinion, maybe better being ignorant, so that we're more docile when a global emergency does happen and the government says jump and we all say, how high? But let's have a little bit more of a look, just a quick one at, I want to just read the end quote here. Let's see if it comes up. Oh, it doesn't have OCR. Okay, we'll have to find it. No problem. It'll be my pleasure. Here we go. It says, a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing, or it can be a vibrant seed giving rise to verdant forests and awakening sleeping giants. Good old Chan Thomas. A little bit of knowledge, a dangerous thing. It could be a seed. Now, what he talks about here, I assume Chan Thomas is a man. The whole thing of the Adam and Eve story is about these cosmic Earth cycles, and you can see here 6,500 years ago, 11,500 years ago. It's basically the Younger Dryas, the last ice age, right? And this has been well documented by people like Graham Hancock and to a large degree Carl, and I can't remember his surname, it'll have to come to me. But yeah, a lot of very academic studies have gone into the meltwater pulse B1 and other impact craters and deluges and mudslides, and it's really a very deep subject. And again, it shows that this cataclysm that is spoken about here in Chan Thomas's writings has happened before. That's a fact. There's no, when we look at the ice cores, we know that the poles have shifted. We know that there's been global cataclysm. We know that there's been higher sea levels and a deluge and all kinds of things. The Sahara was once fertile savanna, fertile land, and now it's a desert. It wasn't always a desert. So something happened there, something very big. And again, why are we mentioning the story of Chan Thomas and the Adam and Eve story about this antediluvian race that was destroyed and then had to rebuild, and we lost the ideas of where we came from and how our genetics came from this primordial group of women, primordial Eve, as it was called. That's a biological term. You can go look that up. Primordial Eve. A very narrow band of genes that we all share as humans. Common group of moms. Apparently about only 8 or so women. Interesting here. So I highly encourage you to have a look at this article because it's fantastically wonderful. But as I said, we're mentioning it because we've had cataclysms in the past, and if that is a true statement, people like the Council of Foreign Relations and the Bilderbergs, what do you think they're going to plan? Not that, or not around that? You must be mistaken and clearly insane. Because they are tasking themselves with global problems, primary ones. At the moment, they're talking about AI. They're talking about India. They're talking about Russia. They're talking about the future of space and telecommunications and splicing human genes and creating the possibility of threats through that kind of splicing being used as bioweapons and things like that. So if they are aware that the Earth has cycles, almost clockwork-like cycles that create great problems, you could understand how a bunch of elites would plan around making bunkers in New Zealand or other places that can withstand not only nuclear war, but this kind of a global cataclysm. And the other insidious thing, and this is where we're going to finish up with StoryTime 11. For those of you that have stuck to it, this whole podcast session, I really thank you, because here comes the linchpin. This is really what kind of undermines this globalist idea of an elite breakaway group that think about Armageddon consistently, because they're the ones that are going to benefit from us, because they've kept the secret of what awaits us from us. I mean, think of how different we would be acting as humans if we knew that we had to prepare for some great problem, whatever it is. And if we are treated like children and not given the full picture, we're not able to make informed decisions, and then we really are just cattle to these elite people. And so to really underscore this point, ladies and gentlemen, we need to look at the Committee of 300. Now, the Committee of 300 is so firstly, it's a story written, it's a paper basically written by Dr. John Coleman. It's in the CIA and the FBI vaults, so I encourage you again, download the PDF, have a look at it, it's great. Also redacted in some parts and not always available to the public until it was released by these authorities. And what it speaks about is this guy here who's basically mostly an academic professional, but he's worked in the CIA as well through operations in Africa. And whilst he was in Africa, he began to see the insidiousness of what was being said about, philanthropic endeavors to try and bring peace and stability and health and all these things to the struggling, developing world that were ridden with war and genocide and all these terrible things. They were going to come by and save everything. And then what he saw instead was just rampant illegality and something that was almost planned. These humans were suffering not because nations just decided, oh, I don't like you, you don't like me, but that there was a more insidious group of people planning constant warfare and misery and just all the nasty things that take us back spiritually and psychologically and physically as a race and as a being connected to this universe. So again, the Club of Rome, as I said, was the foreign relations arm of the Council of Foreign Relations, and they come up often in this document, the Committee of 300. And I want to go through it with you a little bit, because this is the slightly darker side, and this really ties together what these elites are thinking, what they are doing, not just on their websites where it sounds all airy-fairy and, oh great, we're just going to have world peace and, everyone can have it. No, that's not how it works. There are rules for thee and not for the Council of Foreign Relations and the Bilderbergs and all the likeness of it. So this document, I also want to point out, came out in 1991. So not that long ago. But before then, we didn't really have a good summary of all these even secret societies that make a part of the international elite. Remember, we mentioned the Skull and Bones Society, and George Bush was interviewed about that, and he just said, "Well, it's a secret," ha ha ha. Next question. So, as I say, they are chosen, they are formatted, they are given positions of power and influence, and they play ball. They move up the echelons, from the WEF to the wherever, and higher up. And the the Committee of 300. Let's pull it up on screen. Conspirators' Hierarchy: The Story of the Committee of 300 by Dr. John Coleman. So, it is quite lengthy. It is about 160 pages. So I'm not going to go line by line, basically. But he does go through some of the case histories. So he does start to say there is basically, let me show you here. He said, "When I came to the United States in 1969, I found names like the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, Club of Rome, the German Marshall Fund, the Cheney Foundation, the Round Table, the Fabianists, the Venetian Bank Nobility, the Montpellier Society, Hellfire Clubs, and many others were totally unknown." So these are secret organizations and clubs and groups that were also influencing America at the time, that many people didn't even know what these names were. But he had previous, let's say, insight into these groups. And so, for example, he wrote here, "When he was in West Africa, I had the opportunity to view a series of top secret classified documents which were unusually explicit. What I saw filled me with anger and resentment and launched me onto a course from which I have not deviated, namely to uncover what power it is that controls and manages the British and United States governments." So now obviously we've looked at a few of these. He says, "I was thoroughly familiar with all of the well-known secret societies like the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Council of Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergs, Trilaterals, Zionists, Freemasons, Bolsheviks, Rosicrucians, and all of the spin-offs of these secret societies. As an intelligence officer, and even before that, as a young student in the course of my studies at the British Museum in London, I had cut my teeth on all of them, plus a good number of others with whom I imagined Americans were familiar." But then he comes to America, and he realizes, holy crap, there's a whole flock of these things going nuts, and nobody has any grip on this, publicly at least. And so what he begins to see is that these these groups try and create identity movements and right-wing patriotic groups, and so basically trying to make sides that fight each other and erode the system from the inside out, and across all countries, creating wars, creating all kinds of really terrible affairs. Like, for example, I have a family from Italy, and one of the things that he mentions here was, here we go. So he mentions that the Watergate tragedy was a step in the irreversible transition to barbarism, which is enveloping the United States and which is leading us into a one world government, new world order. The United States is now at the same place that Italy found itself when Aldo Moro tried to rescue it from created instability. Now, Moro was targeted by the committee. The late Aldo Moro, Prime Minister of Italy, was one leader who opposed zero-growth population reductions planned for his country, thereby incurring the wrath of the Club of Rome, commissioned by the Olympians to carry out its policies. The Club of Rome, in a courtroom on November 10th, 1982, with a close friend of Moro, testified that the former Prime Minister was threatened by an agent of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, who was also the Committee of 300 member, while he was still U.S. Secretary of State. Now, I mean, when we think about this, this is a huge thing, because It will be recalled that Prime Minister Moro was kidnapped by the Red Brigades in 1978 and subsequently brutally shot to death. It was at a trial of the members of the Red Brigades that several of them testified to the fact that they knew of the high-level U.S. involvement in the plot to kill Moro. When threatening Moro, Kissinger was obviously not carrying out U.S. foreign policy, but rather acting in accordance to the instructions received by the Club of Rome and the foreign policy arm of the Committee of 300. Okay, so that's history for you. And this article really squares this, because that's one example of many where even the Prime Minister gets captured by, and the Red Brigade, if you don't know this, the CIA during the 70s in Europe basically had Operation Gladio, part of a secret umbrella operation for a state of tension in Europe, basically to ensure that Europe fell more closely to the democratic principles and military direction instead of socialist and third world leanings. They basically created a lot of bombings and terrorist attacks, and they funded these clandestine groups that went and created gangs and all kinds of things just to create a state of tension, so that at the end of the day Europe would lean towards America for assistance, for help, and come under the wing of American protection. And you can see that Moro's kidnapping and assassination was orchestrated by policymakers that were not elected officials. This is the whole point. Now, as I said, I'm not going to go too deep into the Committee of 300. I highly recommend that everybody has a good look, because it really goes into the insidious nature of the ideas that these elites have of, again, like Pichet's idea of the limits of growth that the studies showed from the MIT simulations about how population the whole of society would collapse if society was not controlled. And this goes all the way up to the highest levels of military, including NATO and other one world government institutions. But what I really want to show you here from the Committee of 300 article written by Dr. Coleman is, because a lot of it applies to what's happening to us today. This is why I want to bring it to your attention and tie it in with the round table group. So let's have a look here. He basically points out a number of objectives that the globalists are sort of looking for. So not only does he point out their modus operandi, historically what they've been involved in, the think tanks and the academia and the technologically potent industries that kind of come under these influences of apex politics. But what he also points out is a list of their objectives. What are they really trying to do to countries around the world? And, how are they really trying to subvert humanity as a group? Why are they the ire of just everyone in our and conspiracy theorists alike? So, as I said, this is all done through these elites, through propaganda, through psyops, through the media, academic institutions. They can create all kinds of studies that then they can self-reference in their own medias, that then they can use to push their own political agendas, and that's how the whole system works. And then you add to that an infinite emergency, which you then are the only response to, and you got yourself a perfect crime, a perfect system of criminal behavior. And so we need to just have a look at really what these this whole group of institutions what they're really trying to do to us. So let's have a look-see here. As I said, it is quite a number of points, and I really do want to go through them one by one, because that really gives us the perfect summary of this entire document, which basically Dr. Coleman, as we mentioned, references as a transfer of humanity to barbarism. You know, this is where we start to lose the plot, as he says. Okay, so I think I got it here. Let me just make sure this is the correct list, describing the objectives and aims of the one world government. So just before I get into that, again, there was one point that I just wanted to highlight here, and that is this question of the Olympians that are referred to in this document. I think it's just important to mention that before we get into the list, because the Olympians, as I said, are referred to, the real Olympians in our ancient mythology were the antediluvians, you know, the people that created us in their likeness and image, these demigods that, you know, the Sumerians talk about as the Anunnaki, for example. But they refer to themselves in today's day and age as Olympians, because they see themselves as progeny, as you know, the rightful heirs to that ancestral lineage of, you know, gods that control the world and humanity. So they give themselves this title, the Olympians. And this links to the idea of a breakaway civilization, a group of sociopathic, super powerful, super rich, insane people that feel that they can survive whatever cataclysm comes, and they do not need to inform us or make us a part of the solution to that future cataclysm or problem, but really we're just there to help them survive that. You know, we just keep the economy going, and we just build the bunkers and shut up and accept their laws and take their vaccines and all these good things. But to what end? Let's have a look. So all of this you can see here. Now I want you to think about these Olympians and their goals and how that applies to some of the stuff we're seeing today. Remember, this is 1991, referring to stuff back from the 1920s and 30s and further back. So let's have a look here. All right, this is how we're going to finish off Storytime 11, ladies and gents. So we are, we've just hit 2.5 hours, so thank you all for sticking with us. Have a listen to this. So, what are the goals of the secret elite group? Writes Coleman. The inheritors of Illuminism, the cult of Dionysius, the cult of Isis, Catharism, Bogomilism, question mark. This elite group that also calls itself the Olympians, they truly believe they are equal in power and stature to the legendary gods of Olympus, who have, like Lucifer, their god, set themselves above our true God. He literally outright calls them Satanists, basically. They absolutely believe that they have been charged with implementing the following by divine right. So this is what they believe they are on this earth to do, whether we like it or not. Number 1, a world government, new world order, with a unified church and monetary system under their direction. Not many people are aware of the one world government that began setting up its church in the 1920s and 30s, for they realized that the need for a religious belief inherent in mankind to have an outlet, and therefore to set up a church body to channel that belief in any direction that they desired, was super important. So in other words, they control the church and what that belief system is. Number 2, the utter destruction of all national identity and national pride. Think about how in America, if you put up an American flag, you might be deemed a domestic terrorist and put on a list because of your very strong patriotic views. Or just the tension between wokeism and conservatism. Things that nowadays even attack children, both unborn and born, but still minors, nonetheless. So the destruction of religion, and more specifically, more especially, the Christian religion, with the one exception, their own creation mentioned above. So you can see that the Vatican recently has followed a lot of the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, United Nations, and a lot of these globalist views, mass immigration, and just the mixing of everyone with everyone and everything with everything. The Christian faith, we've had protests where there's been people tearing out pages of the Bible and, saying all kinds of things because they, believe in Lucifer or whatever the case is. But, you try to do that with a Quran or the Torah. The Christian faith is not taken seriously anymore. It's become far deviated from its roots in certain ways. Now, I'm not all for like conservatism and hell and damnation, but I don't like institutionalized religion that takes advantage of people that are looking for a strong belief in the miracle of creation and that which brought it about. When places like the Vatican basically have vaults of, stolen artifacts from places and their own intelligence services and satellites, and can they be trusted to really provide you with religion? It's very diluted, and so this falls straight into that, destruction of especially the Christian religion. Of the Abrahamic religions, you can see Judaism and the Muslim faith still hold very, very strong religious communities, and I would argue that the Christian faith is dissolving in that regard. Maybe certain sects are increasing, certain groups of the Christian faith might be increasing, but overall it's moved away from its original kinds of doctrines. Moving forward, number 4. Control of each and every person through means of mind control that Brzezinski calls technotronics, which would create human-like robots and a system of terror beside which Felix Dzerzhinsky's Red Terror will look like children at play. So mind control to create human-like robots and a system of terror to make, just what we're used to just seem like child's play. In other words, keep us in a state of fear the whole time. Number 5, an end to all industrialization and the production of nuclear generation electric power in a way they call post-industrial zero-growth society. Exempted are the computer service industries. United States industries that remain will be exported to countries such as Mexico, where abundant slave labor will be available. Unemployables in the wake of the industrial destruction will either become opium, heroin, or cocaine addicts, think of the fentanyl, or become statistics in the elimination process we know today as Global 2000. Now, many say Global 2000 links to the UN Agenda 2021, which has now become Agenda 2030. We don't have time to look into that, but that's also globalist ideas of how to reduce our footprint on the earth, and thereby kind of just keeping a very firm boot on your neck as a person of this earth just trying to get by. So let me just put it that way. Number 6, legalization of drugs and pornography. We can see let's say many sexual deviations or derivations, I should say, that are usually reserved for adult activity and relationships now being really socially pushed onto even minors. And drugs as well. As they legalize them, we think, yay, weed is now legal. But the problem is they give you medical marijuana, which they grow in a certain kind of way that it's not natural. They give you a strain of something that it doesn't make seeds because it's a proprietary product. So although they want to legalize drugs, they are also then going to control what we are unknowingly putting in our body. even if they seem like natural products, like let's say marijuana. Number 7, they say depopulation of large cities according to the tidal run carried out by Pol Pot in Cambodia. So he says that that was a trial run. It is interesting to note that Pol Pot's genocidal plans were drawn up here in the United States by one of the Club of Rome's research foundations. It is also interesting that the committee is presently seeking to reinstate Pol Pot butchers in Cambodia. So again, this is in the 90s. Number 8, suppression of all scientific development except for those deemed beneficial by the committee, especially targeted as nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Particularly hated are the fusion experiments, which are presently being scorned and ridiculed by the committee and its jackals of the press. So let's break a few things there. Why has Europe turned off so many of its nuclear power plants, but they're not ready to replace that energy with some other form of green? Like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't go green or have better technologies for energy production, but you need to have a contingency plan. If you're using 10 gigawatts and then you shut 10 gigawatts down but only produce 2 with renewables, you got a problem. You've just stymied your economic growth. Now, I'd say that when you have a comparable amount of energy, then start, as you replace it, turn it off and go green. It's fine, no problem. But this kind of plan that we're doing around the world is not sustainable. And when the Nord Stream 2 went down, Europe lost its access to cheap energy, and it's shutting down, like Germany and France, many nuclear power plants. And they're trying to start them up now, but it takes time. And, there's still forces trying to shut them down as well. So you can see they're trying to suppress nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. And what they're hating is the plasma technology, like the tokamaks and stellarators. In the old days, this was sort of called cold fusion, basically igniting plasma to generate energy, kind of like a controlled radiation chain reaction like you would see in a sun, and then just using magnets to channel those fields and that plasma. And they say here, fusion torch, probably used, could create unlimited, untapped natural resources from the most ordinary substances. Fusion torch uses, Fusion torch uses are legion and would help benefit mankind in a manner which is, as yet, not even remotely comprehended by the public. Now, we've touched across energy production technologies in the aerospace division and the UFO file. We see that these technologies have been heavily suppressed because we're still basically using fossil fuels and technologies from 80 years ago, the nuclear stuff of the 20s. We've gotten further than this, but every time patents get slapped on it and people buy it out, and it gets shelved until they can make full money out of the peak oil and the fossil fuels. They want to make their money from it. They don't want you to upgrade to the iPhone 20 if they're on the iPhone 15. They want you to go through iPhone 16, 17, 18, 19. They want to make their money as they plan the obsoletism and force us to kind of get into these states of constant consumerism. So let's jump into number 9 here. So they also plan to cause, by means of limited wars in the advanced countries and by means of starvation and disease in the third world countries, the death of 3 billion people by the year 2000. Okay, so the year 2000's passed. This was 10 years prior to the date predicted. But you can see that they call these people useless eaters, and the Committee of 300 commissioned Cyrus Vance to write a paper on the subject of how best to bring about such genocide. The paper was produced under the title Global 200 Report and was accepted and approved for by action by President Carter for and on behalf of the US government, and accepted by Edwin Muskie, then Secretary of State. Remember, the Secretary of State is one of the key people to receive policy from these committees and these think tanks and then push it into the political and legal systems of each country. So it says there that the population of the United States is to be reduced by 100 million by the year 2050. So number 10, to weaken the moral fiber of the nation and to demoralize workers in the labor class by creating mass unemployment. As jobs dwindle due to the post-industrial zero-growth policies introduced by the Club of Rome, Demoralized and discouraged workers will resort to alcohol and drugs. The youth of the land will be encouraged by means of rock music and drugs to rebel against the status quo, thus undermining and eventually destroying the family unit. In this regard, the Committee of 300 commissioned Tavistock Institute to prepare a blueprint as to how this could be achieved. Tavistock directed Stanford Research Institute to undertake the work under the direction of Professor Willis Harman. The work later became known as the Aquarian Conspiracy. Yeah, very interesting. So, I love rock music. I love music in general. And, part of the music of rock and punk was anti-establishment. So there is a bit of a backfire that can happen there. But if you look at today, at the end of the day, the Committee of 300 seems to suck people in and then control them. Let's take a look, for example. Rage Against the Machine. When I listen to their music, specifically Killing in the Name of, what is that song about? It's like, are you under control? The question they ask. No, I won't do what you told me. In fact, they say, fuck you, I won't do what you told me. That's how angry that song is about the systems of control. Forgive my language there, but that is the lyric of the song, telling the elite, I will not follow your crazy orders of satanic origin, of just unhuman-like, just complete insanity. And a lot of the rock system at that System of a Down and others there, they made all this music that was very anti-establishment. But then if you look at the same band today, Rage Against the Machine is all like, oh, you must take your vaccine and listen to your government. Yay. So eventually they too have been eroded from their, use their music to suck people in and then pass the message on of compliancy, We saw the same thing with many other bands that, had reports in mainstream media. Mumford and Sons and the Offspring drummer was obviously released because he medically couldn't even take the vaccine, but they kicked him out of the band anyway. These kinds of things I think are good examples of again, just how not only rock but art and all these things have in the past been used by secret societies, intelligence agencies and governments to really control the culture. And even though some of it helps us free our minds and connects us to really create unity, it can then also create that same unity that can then be used to create violence and disunity. Like, for example, if you look at the fiery but mostly peaceful protests that we had during the George Floyd uprising, something like that should bring us together, but instead it just caused violence and destruction and further separated people and ethnic groups and cultural groups. So I just wanted to make that point a little bit more clear as to when they talk about how, rock music and drugs, there's a positive side to that, but again, who's controlling it and in what way? And as that suppresses us and kind of shakes up the system a little bit, it also makes us a bit more malleable to control the youth, to separate them from the family. Where does that sound familiar? And again, it goes on. It says, to weaken the moral fiber of the nation and to demoralize the workers of the labor class, creating mass unemployment. As jobs dwindle due to the post-industrialization, so we read this section, but basically that just says that if people are demoralized and discouraged, they're not going to protest, they're not going to fight back, they're just going to be compliant, they're going to be struggling too much paycheck to paycheck to study what the Club of Rome or the Bilderbergs or the Council of Foreign Relations have to have planned for them, what sort of things they need to what tunes they need to sing to. So Number 11, there's just a few more and then we'll wrap up. So, to keep people everywhere from deciding their own destinies by means of one created crisis after another, and then managing such crises. This will confuse and demoralize the population to the extent where, faced with too many choices, apathy on a massive scale will result. Like, that's 2023. That's where we're at now. In the case of the United States, an agency for crisis management is already in place and is called the Federal Emergency Management Agency, aka FEMA, whose existence I first disclosed in 1980. So, we only got FEMA after 9/11, officially through the Homeland National Defense money system that basically endows it with financing and with political power before the law and all these things. But I think it's completely unconstitutional in some other, in some ways. There's a bit of a debate there, but basically, this FEMA emergency thing that we also look, for example, in previous story times about Rex 84. How to round up dissidents and basically control them when they act against the government unfavorably. When you're trying to, as the government, start a dirty war and then they just, want to protest for peace, those damn hippies. So demoralization, that is very, very powerful. Number 12, to introduce new cults and to continue to boost those already functioning, which include, for example, rock music gangsters, and Tavistock created rock groups like, they say, the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, and to continue to build up the cult of Christian fundamentalism begun by the British East India Company, the servant of the British East India Company, Derby, which will be misused to strengthen the Zionist state of Israel through identifying with the Jews through the myth of the God's chosen people, and by donating very substantial amounts of money to what they mistakenly believe is a religious cause in the furtherance of Christianity. Now, what are they trying to say there? Basically, they're trying to say, if we can convince the ultra-Christians that have very strong beliefs, that part of their beliefs are not the Judaic traditions of the Jewish people, but the Zionist. They make a bit of a distinction. Even in Israel now, you get the ultra-Orthodox that say the Jewish state is become Zionist. It's no longer following its religious teachings, the Talmud and the Torah and all of these teachings. And so they distinct between Judaism and Zionism. And they say here in this document that if you can confuse the Christians to support Zionism as a form of their religious duty, because again, the Abrahamic languages all share a common root. So if you can get those Christians to back the Zionist state, well, you can, put forward this myth of God's chosen people and, do all kinds of really large damage to the minds of people in that area of the world. And we are talking about, Israel and Palestine and the surrounds. So that's what they're talking about there. So just a couple more here very quick. To press for the spread of religion cults such as the Muslim Brotherhood, fundamentalisms and others, to carry out experiments, in the style of Jim Jones and all of that. It is worth noting that the late Ayatollah Khomeini was a creation of British military intelligence, the Military Intelligence Division 6, MI6, and was reported in his 1985 work. That's good old Dr. John Coleman reported on that in 1985. So, number 15, to export religious liberation ideas around the world so as to undermine all existing religions, but more especially the Christian religion. This began with Jesuit liberation theology, which brought about the downfall of the Somoza family rule in Nicaragua, which also underwent, regime change because of America, which is today destroying El Salvador and so on and so forth, civil wars and all these things. It talks about the Mary Knoll mission, which proves that nuns were, what the nuns were doing in the country, which is basically just working for the United States foreign affairs agenda, and played a leading role in bringing communism to Rhodesia, Mozambique, Angola, and South Africa. And for those of you that have lived in this part of the world, in sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa area, you'll know the border disputes and the rooi gevaar, the red threat, and the battle between communism and the ideologies that we had here, and just many destroyed lives, when they came back from the war, and they just wondered, what did we go and fight for? And you'll see that there wasn't really a good reason. It was all just to export religious liberation and all these things. Number 16, to cause a total collapse of the world's economies and engender total political chaos. I mean, that says that, it speaks for itself, whether we had the pandemic or not, and the shutdowns and the lockdowns, whether we had that or not, we were still just printing money furiously and not really addressing global economic problems. That's why the BRICS is now trying to go back to a gold-based economy, because we just went from fractional reserve lending to infinite reserve lending, and empty money supply go brrr. We've been completely irresponsible economically, globally speaking, but club of the Committee of 300 will tell you that is on purpose. So number 17, and this one's the obvious one, to take control of the foreign and domestic policies of the United States. Number 18, to give the fullest support to supranational institutions such as the United Nations, International Monetary Fund, Bank of International Settlements, World Court, and as far as possible to make local institutions of lesser effect by gradually phasing them out or bringing them under the mantle of the United Nations, like the WEF, like the World Health Organization, and many of these others. Number 19, penetrate and subvert all governments and work from within them to destroy the sovereign integrity of nations represented by them. And, if I think of South Africa, for example, we've had state capture here through the Guptas and the Zuma family, among others, of the political elites, and that's exactly what happens. You penetrate the government and then you gut it. Destroy it from the inside out. Number 2, organize a worldwide terrorist apparatus to negotiate with terrorists whenever terrorist activities take place. That's David Icke speaks about problem, reaction, solution. Basically, you create a problem, you then make a mass reaction so that the public want, help and safety and, something to happen to try and remedy the problem. Then you say, oh, look, I'm the solution. I created, well, first you say, look, oh, ISIS are beheading people. That's terrible. We need to go stop them. Then, you get people uppity and you go and invade a few countries and, come in unannounced and blow some things up and kill some people and drone strike around, all these great things. And then you say, oh, look, we solved the problem. But then we find out that you actually created the problem by, sponsoring, funding, training these kinds of people. Al-Nusra, Al-Shabaab, all these offshoots, Boko Haram, they all have traces in much deeper channels, let's just say. So number 21, take control of the education in America with the intent and purpose of utterly and completely destroying it. I read a report saying that this is going to be the first generation around the world that is going to have a lower IQ than the generation before it. Now, they point to corona and other things, sicknesses, autism, the rise of all kinds of problems. But a lot of that also starts with a very low level of education. I mean, here in South Africa, I had the choice of standard grade maths and higher grade maths. And a few years later, they had not just standard grade maths, but they had then functional maths, which was barely maths. And then they had now they've got a step lower than that, and that's called maths literacy. We're literally doing maths with words because, it just helps some people figure it out. But it's not that we're raising the academic levels and trying to support students to get better education. Instead, no, we're lowering the education to try to just meet people that are having social troubles. It's completely backwards. So that's what they mean about number 21. And, this kind of like wraps up the Committee of 300 paper in a sense. Like, this is what globalism is pointing to. This is what this elite, unabated power is creating with its institutions, with its policy making. And as you can see, there is a separation between them and the rest of the world, us. The 97% of the world, not the elite, 3% or 1% or whatever the case is. But at the end of the day, these are their targets and objectives. The New World Order, the liberal economic order. All these things here have been parts of institutions and people that have held humanity hostage by their incredible reach, both in the form of real money, real industrial power, but also political connection. And so I hope that this story time has brought you guys to a really deeper and more clearer understanding about these institutional global groups that are really at the tip of the spear of all the politics that we undergo in our various countries. And as we try and pull humanity towards positive things for humanity, there's this other group that's like, nah, you guys are too many and you don't know what's going on, and it's better if you just, but like a mushroom kept in the dark and fed a whole bunch of crap. And we'll just tell you when things are, when you need to do or know anything. It's kind of the vibe that they give off, and all of it is marred in deep, illegal, unconstitutional, just unhuman kind of ideology. This is why we needed to point this out and say, when we go and look on the internet at the Bilderburg website and it all looks very sanitized and, oh yes, these are just policymakers and just experts and academics and politicians watching. No, these are people that have not your interests in mind, their own interests in mind, and they've got the ability, the technology and the money and the people power to basically just turn you into a statistical average that they put into their computer models, so that when they figure out where to build their bunkers to survive the next cataclysm, they'll make sure that you kind of break the wave, so to speak. I mean, this is just me going off a little bit on my own kind of interpretation, but really the fact of the matter is, government is not your friend. Institutions of a supranational origin are what govern them, and so the level of corruption goes further and higher and is more removed from the public. And the public is not always aware of this. Bilderberg meets in secret, like the others do. What they talk about is not known until they choose to talk about it, but they don't say who says what. They don't say why anyone says what. And then a few months and years later, we find, oh, look, this was policy that came from such and such and such and such a group of powerful people that met. And, oh, here we find ourselves now. And, when I read the Committee of 300 paper by Dr. Coleman, and I read those 21 points, when it starts talking about the useless eaters and how the elites need to control people through the media and through social institutions and supranational organizations that go above countries and to really erode countries from the inside out. We look around the world today and we're like, is this a fictional thing or a non-fictional thing? Is this a CIA psyops of some dude who just wrote a thing, and then the CIA decided to keep it in their vaults for us to kind of ponder on, just fun reading before bed? Or is this part of a real grain of truth of a bunch of elite sociopaths that have their own future in mind and not the rest of ours. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've gone past the witching hour, and it's been my great pleasure to give you this 3-hour-long story time. We went through a lot of stuff, so I hope you've enjoyed it. Feel free, again, as I said always, to be a part of the dialogue, part of the dialectic. Ask your information, ask your questions, tell me what you think, or mention topics for future story times. It's always a pleasure to engage with you, because really all we have is each other at the end of the day. I want to finish off story time, this particular story time, with the lyrics from Aerosmith's Living on the Edge. I can't play you the song for copyright reasons, but I was going through some of the information that I wanted to bring forward to you this evening, and for some unknown reason the song popped into my head, and some of the lyrics really caught the substance of everything we've spoken about today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave you with these fine lyrics. I can't play you the song, but I encourage you to pop that into your sound system when you get a chance. But the opening part of Aerosmith's Living on the Edge goes, "There's something wrong with the world today. I don't know what it is. There's something wrong with our eyes. We're seeing things in a different way, and God knows it's not His. There sure ain't no surprise that we're living on the edge." He goes further down in the song, and he says, "If Chicken Little tells you that the sky is falling, even if it wasn't, would you still come crawling back again? I guess you would, my friend, again and again and again." And I think really what those lyrics to me say is a kind of a summary of where we are in the world today. There's something wrong. We don't know what it is. There must be something wrong with our eyes. We're not seeing things correctly. We're seeing them in a different way. And it's not natural. God knows this is not His doing. This is humanity's just gone off the rails again. You know, maybe a good flood is not just a natural cause, but God just being like, okay, we have to try this one again. But yeah, this question of living on the edge, whether you're a Dutch farmer or a Canadian trucker or just the average citizen trying to make sense of the world, we're literally on the edge. There's not really much more room for us to move before the cliff sends us over the edge. And so this is why story time has come about, to try and make a fun way of, well, not fun, but just to try and present this kind of information to you so that we can be level-headed about our place in society and our everyday actions, and really just get those aligned with the very big forces that are falling upon us. Ladies and gentlemen, what a wonderful, wonderful gathering this has been. Thank you to everyone that's joined us. It's been wonderful to see everyone popping in and out. Again, the Prime Matter Podcast at gmail.com for any comments or questions, or you can leave them in the YouTube channel's chat. Don't subscribe. YouTube is evil. Just download the podcast and keep it, is what I suggest. One day we'll move to Rumble, and then I think that'll be a little bit better. But for the moment, it's been my pleasure to host you this Sunday evening. Have a fantastic end to your weekend, start to your week, and to the end of the month of May. It's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks as we go forward. And Storytime will be here to bring you all the interesting things that happen. It's always interesting how something cool or important will happen in the news, and it just somehow fits into the story time that we're planning for the week. So we'll see you all next Sunday for the next episode, and Storytime 11 closes. Just wishing you all a fantastic start to the week. Much love. Peace out.